Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Parenting Against the Grain. I hope this is working. There's this new interface with doing Facebook Live, so let's hope this is working. I'm going to check on my phone real quick to make sure that it might be working in the group. Let's see if I can just check real quick, since I don't want this to be wasted time. Let's see if it's showing up. Come on. Is it going to show up? That is the question. I can't see it at the moment. Let's hope for the best. Okay. Um, so, this is Parenting Against the Grain, and I'm Amy Webb. If you guys are new, welcome to this group. It's just sort of slow. I don't know why. If you're new, welcome to this group. We talk about parenting against the grain, which means sort of learning how to combine research and our own intuition to make parenting decisions for our kids and our families, and not just sort of go with the flow of what everybody else is doing in terms of parenting and what sort of culture or society tells us how we should be parenting. So it's kind of more mindful, thoughtful approach to parenting, and that's what we talk about in this group. We talk a lot about free play, managing technology, and using research and child development to understand why our kids are doing what they're doing and how we can support them. So today I come on almost every week if I can. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about boredom, because I know right now, since most of us are at home with our kids all the time, they are getting bored. We might be getting bored. But mostly I think it's for, our kids. We hear this all the time, even other times when we're not stuck at home. But mom or dad, I'm bored. I don't have anything to do. And so it puts this sort of pressure on us as parents to respond to that and figure out, what are we going to do when our kids are bored? And now, being at home, even though we have a huge range of technological options, I think kids are probably still saying that they're bored and they don't have anything to do. And so what do we do? So I started thinking more about this issue of boredom. I wrote an article about it last week. So I did some looking into the research and what we know about boredom from kind of a psychological perspective. And it was really pretty interesting to read this understanding of boredom, not just sort of like a surface level, but really what's the psychology of boredom and why does it happen? So one of the main things that the psychological literature talks about is sort of like, how do we define boredom? Is it just that you don't have anything to do? Is it sort of similar to depression? Is it apathy? And so that was one of the interesting questions, is like, what is boredom? So the best definition I found from a psychologist was this: boredom is unfulfilled desire for satisfying activity. And I thought that captured it pretty well, because it's not apathy that you don't want to do anything. It's that you don't have anything to do that you feel is like satisfying or that is engaging in some way. So that to me defined it pretty well, because we've all experienced boredom, but when you really think about what that means for your mental health, it's an uncomfortable state to be in, because you want to do something engaging or satisfying or intellectually stimulating, but you can't find that thing that it is that's going to meet that need. And so it is sort of an uncomfortable feeling. Um, and so I think that's helpful to think about when we think about kids and when they say they're bored. Um, it's not always that they just don't have anything to do. It's that the things that they see as options to do don't fulfill this need somehow. So that's kind of a helpful way to look at it, because it really is a need. It's not just sort of like, I want to be engaged or I want to be entertained. It's like some psychological need that's not being met. Um, so that's helpful to think about when we think about solutions or ways to approach boredom, because it's not just about like throwing activities at them. It's coming up with ways that they can be engaged with something. Um, so a lot of times when in parenting circles, when we talk about boredom, the first solution that people throw out is, oh, just make a board jar or a boredom poster of options of things that you can do, right? You see this on Pinterest all the time. Like you have a little jar and it has all these little pieces of paper in it for options or ideas that kids can do, and it could be any range of things. It could be writing or art or crafts or drawing or just anything. And I don't think those are all bad. Sometimes those things can work and they can give you new ideas to offer to your kids. But I think the reason, at least in my house, they haven't always worked is comes back to when you think about what boredom is. These ideas we give our kids are extrinsic to them, right? We are offering them things to do, and it's coming from either our perspective or whoever created this list of ideas, their perspective of what might be fun for kids to do, but it's not coming from them. And so the difference, I think, is that extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And I don't know about how your kids are, but my kids don't do well with activities that are not intrinsically motivating. So if the idea does not come from them and it's not something they are interested in, it's not going to fly. And so I think that's often what we struggle with as parents, is that we offer them all these ideas like, here's this, try this, what about this art project, or even like new toys or whatever. But if it's not something that comes from them intrinsically, a lot of times if they do engage with it, it's not going to last long. And a lot of times they won't even engage with it, they'll just blow it off, right? And so I think that's really the key point that I wanted to make with this, is understanding that boredom is like a psychological need, and that that's not being met, and that all these lists and ideas and things don't always work because they're extrinsic to the child, and the child possibly has no real interest in them. And so anything that is going to really engage them, I think, has to come from their own interests, their own motivation, something intrinsic. Um, and that's, I think, also why, even in our age of technology, we have iPads and computers and online programs, and kids will still say they're bored. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of these ways that kids engage with technology are still sort of passive. They might be learning something online, but they're just kind of sitting there watching it. They're not really always actively engaging with something or hands on learning. And so that's why I think even though we give them an iPad full of games, sometimes they may still be, say, in 5 or 10 minutes, say, oh, I'm bored. I don't have anything to do, because this information passively being given to them and they're not really engaging with it in an active way. And so technology can be helpful if it prompts new interests or new discussions or things that they can engage with, but passively just sort of receiving information from technology, I think, just sometimes can add to the boredom. And so that's why, they just even get bored with the iPad or the computer or whatever else they're doing. um, and so ultimately what we're trying with helping our kids get through boredom, what we're trying to teach them really is some cognitive skills to cope with that uncomfortable feeling and to get through it on their own, because that is really the ultimate solution to boredom, is helping them learn, when I get to this uncomfortable feeling of boredom, I can get myself through it using my own brain and some sort of cognitive strategy that I've learned through the years. And actually they're doing studies now that we're in this, sort of age of technology being everywhere and kids having access to it from such a young age. And what these researchers have found is that the more kids have access to TV, even technology, iPads, all these things that we have now, over the past, maybe 10, 15 years, couple decades, these studies have shown that kids are in some ways becoming less creative. So they do studies of cultures where there's no TV, these more primitive cultures where there's not very much electronics or TV, compared to more modern cultures where there's a lot of access to technology and TV and things like that. And they find that the kids on these measures of creativity, the kids who have no access to TV or electronics are actually more creative. And that's not necessarily surprising because, um, they have to use their own devices. They have to use their own mental capacity to come up with ideas for things to do or work on different chores or things that their parents might have for them to do. And so it's not to say, hi Bridget, it's not to say that all technology is bad. I think it definitely has a place, but it is something to think about if we're using technology as sort of a crutch. And I mean, I do this too. I think we all have a tendency to do this. When we're bored, we sit there and scroll through Facebook or Instagram instead of, grab a book or go do an art project or something else that might be a little bit more creative. So um, I think that's the tendency in our culture right now. And so part of it is being mindful of that. And so we can encourage our kids maybe to just a little bit lean maybe the other way and try to use um, cognitive skills instead of always relying on technology when they're bored. Uh, and the other thing that this helps kids with, so it helps them learn the skill, right, to get past the boredom and to find ways to engage their mind in other ways, but also it's a really good strategy for them to learn so that they don't lean towards kind of more destructive tendencies to deal with boredom. So there have been some studies that show that people who have a tendency to be bored easily, and so this might be the person who what we would kind of, laughingly call the adrenaline junkie, the people who really like a lot of stimulation and get bored easily. They want to be, jumping out of airplanes, going on roller coasters, right? We all know people like that have that tendency that they really like a lot of stimulation. And some people are the opposite, obviously. So those people who tend to like a lot of stimulation and want a lot of high energy kind of activities, those people tend to get bored easier, which makes sense. Well, those people, to avoid boredom because it's an uncomfortable feeling, tend to do more sort of avoidance strategies, which would be things like possibly gambling, addiction issues, um, any sort of avoidance that's sort of an unhealthy avoidance of boredom. So maybe doing risky behavior that's dangerous because you get the thrill from it. So I think the underlying issue, comes back to what are we trying to teach our kids for this, for their life, for life skills that they can have later on. And so if we can teach them how to cope with boredom in a healthy way and kind of get past that uncomfortable feeling using their own cognitive skills, then maybe they wouldn't be as likely to do these more sort of destructive habits that sometimes are used to avoid boredom. Not all the time. There's many factors at play here, but there is some research that suggests that. So this is sort of a life skill that is really good to learn at an early age, so that when they get into being an adult in college and they find themselves bored, then they know what to do at that point. So the question always comes back to, what do we do when our kids say they're bored? So my first inclination really, and I write this in the article, is to basically do nothing. I mean, I know it's ridiculous to say that, but, and it's not just do nothing. You just say, oh, sorry, kiddo, you're on your own. But I would say resist the tendency to just throw activities at them right away. Give them some time. I always tell my kids, oh, you're bored. That's great. This is a great opportunity to be creative and use your brain in a new way. I know it sounds cliche, but it really is true. So I would say, first of all, just pause on the activities and give them some time to work it out themselves. Now, having said this, I know that there is going to be lots of whining generally for most kids. Whining ensues almost immediately. So this is typical, I think. My kids do it too. But I think you have to give them some time to get past that. That's sort of that first level uncomfortable feeling. And they whine about it and they don't like it. And it's not fun to be bored. And so give them some time to get through that. In my experience, it only lasts maybe 15 minutes. It depends on your kid, it might last longer, where they whine about being bored. And then they start to get their brain going and they start to, think of things that they could possibly do. And that's when the magic really starts to happen. I think that they're like, oh, wait, I can, make something out of a cardboard box, or I can go do, they'll usually come up with something. Not always, but you can start to offer suggestions of like, hey, we have these supplies available, or, things like that, subtle suggestions. But I would, maybe don't do all the work for them. Don't say, oh, let's do an art project that involves this, this, and this. Just lay out some options, cardboard boxes, paint, whatever you think that they might like. Um, Sometimes that's all you need to do, and they take it from there and they'll figure out something. The other thing I came up with in this article, and I'm going to post it here, is a list of questions rather than giving them activities. Then you can offer some questions that are kind of just like prompts to get them thinking. So I'm going to pull these up so I can look at them again. What happened? Where did it go? Oh, it may not work. Oh, here we go. Okay, so things like what activities make your body feel good and energized? Let's go do those. Okay, and so the reason I wrote these questions this way was because I think you can use boredom as a way for kids to get kind of more in touch with who they are. Because I don't know about you, but I remember being a child and being bored, and you know, I would just go to my room and figure out something to do. And it was during those times that I really feel like I got a sense of who I was. And so, it's not, I don't know if all kids are, it depends on their age, if they're sort of mindful enough to be kind of self aware that this is what boredom is for. But it is something to think about. Can you kind of guide them with these questions to understand something about themselves? Because the other thing about boredom is that, and that psychological research talks about this, is some of boredom is sort of a lack of meaning. And so if you can offer them questions that might prompt them to go back to something that they liked, or think about something about themselves that would give meaning to this situation, um, or to their experience. And so that's what these questions are meant to do. So another one is, what's your favorite memory? Go back to it in your mind. Okay, that's kind of bringing back this meaning part of it, right? Right now, especially since we're stuck at home, we can't go anywhere really. We can't go to the park or the amusement park or the golf course or whatever that we usually would do with our kids. But think about something that you enjoyed doing in the past and kind of imagine that you're there. um, Things like that. And I don't know why this is not coming up. There we go. Another one question that I thought of was, what is one thing that brings you joy? Let's see if we can do it. Okay. And so if they can't come up with an answer, then that's a good way to just, help them explore their interests and what's something that brings you joy that we can actually do right now. And so there's a lot of things that we might not could do because we're at home and we can't go out, but this can help be sort of a point of self-discovery as too, and that may lead into something else, like, oh, what brings me joy is baking. Maybe that would what would bring me joy. But okay, so let's bake something new that we haven't done before. Or sports, for my kid, especially my one son, sports brings him joy. Okay, so we might not be able to go do everything about that sport that you love, but we can go throw the ball around in the backyard, or we can go look up some books about sports that you like, or we can watch some videos, or whatever it might be, that relates to that thing that brings them joy. And so I think that's kind of a helpful thing to look at. One of the other questions was, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? Okay, and so that's a good starting off point. Where would you go? Okay, so maybe go there in your mind, first of all, or let's go research about that place. And you could even kind of plan a hypothetical trip that you would want to go on someday to this place that you've heard about, but you don't know much about. That sounds fun. And so I have some other questions. I'll post these in the group, but I think the whole point of this approach to boredom is, again, bringing back the idea that it's not apathy. It's not that our kids are lazy. It's just that they need to somehow be engaged with something that's interesting to them, and it has to come from them. So something like questions, I think, approaches it in a better way because it prompts their own thinking and what are the things that I like and that I'm interested in and that I could come up with about this topic or about this thing that I'm interested in. And so they're more likely to become engaged with that um, than something you just throw at them that comes from you or comes from some list, that doesn't really relate to them. So I think that's a helpful approach. I hope you guys find it helpful. Try it out the next time your kids say that they're bored and let me know if it works. I'll post these questions in the group and you can take a look at them, give them a try and see. Again, it does depend on age because if you have toddlers, this sort of more mindful approach may not work. So that's a little different. But I think the idea of approaching boredom from a perspective of kids' intrinsic interests rather than just these extrinsic ideas that are, not really related to them. I think even with toddlers, that could help them come up with things that they're interested in. That might be a helpful approach. So that's all I have. If you guys have questions, if you're watching this later, put them in the comments. I will check back. And I hope you're hanging in there with all the staying at home and homeschooling. I know it's challenging for sure. Reach out to me anytime if you have questions, and I hope you have a good day. Thanks for watching.